High above a midnight sky en route from Atlanta to Los Angeles, Lydia Carter's hopes for a tranquil first-class journey were shattered by a shocking confrontation. With her infant son nestled in her arms, she found herself the target of flight attendant Fiona Doyle's sudden, unprovoked hostility. Gasps rippled through the cabin as accusations flew and tension soared. In that eerie hush, Lydia's resolve blazed brighter than ever, setting the stage for a battle of dignity at 30,000 feet. Where are people watching? Comment below, like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell. On a red-eye flight from Atlanta to Los Angeles with Celestial Air, Lydia Carter clutched her infant son tightly as she settled into her first-class seat. Dressed in a smart blazer and exuding quiet determination, Lydia had chosen this journey for both work and personal reasons. As the plane's doors closed and the cabin lights dimmed to create a calm atmosphere for sleep and relaxation, an unexpected commotion shattered the peace. Without warning, Fiona Doyle, a flight attendant known for her strict adherence to rules, advanced briskly down the aisle. Her uniform was pristine, and her face was set in a stern, unyielding expression. As she reached Lydia's row, Fiona's eyes narrowed, and in a sudden, jarring moment, she struck Lydia across the face. The blow, delivered without any warning, sent shockwaves through the first-class cabin. Lydia's heart pounded as confusion and pain spread through her, yet, even in that moment of shock, she instinctively held her son closer. Passengers, many clad in business attire and designer outfits, turned their heads in disbelief. Whispers erupted around the cabin as some began recording the incident on their smartphones. In that brief, chaotic moment, what had started as a routine, quiet flight transformed into a scene of raw confrontation. Lydia, though reeling from the unexpected slap, fought hard to maintain her composure. Every detail. The shocked expressions, the rustling of seats, the low hum of the engines, seemed to magnify the injustice unfolding before them. For Lydia, the incident was not just physical but a deep emotional blow. She had booked her seat weeks in advance, and her confirmed reservation should have guaranteed her dignity and respect. Instead, she found herself singled out by Fiona's aggressive actions. The stark contrast between Lydia's calm, measured presence and Fiona's rapid descent into hostility left an indelible mark on everyone witnessing the event. Even as Lydia's mind raced, the pain of the slap mingled with a fierce determination not to be defeated by such unprovoked aggression. In that moment, amid the chaotic whispers and the recording devices capturing every second, Lydia silently vowed to stand her ground. Unbeknownst to her, this confrontation would soon ripple beyond the confines of the aircraft, setting in motion a chain of events that would challenge authority, expose prejudice, and ultimately forge a path toward justice. In the moments following the altercation, Lydia Carter sat motionless, absorbing the shock that rippled through the premium cabin of Celestial Air. Despite the searing pain from Fiona Doyle's slap, Lydia refused to display any weakness. Her steady gaze and resolute expression spoke volumes, even as the whispered murmur of unsettled passengers grew louder. Phones were lifted, recording apps opened, and the incident was quickly being documented by those around her. Throughout the flight, Lydia maintained her dignity. She clutched her infant son protectively, determined to shield him from the chaos while silently enduring the ordeal. In the wake of the confrontation, many passengers, dressed in crisp business suits and luxurious fabrics, watched with a mix of disbelief and quiet solidarity. Some whispered amongst themselves, "How can someone treat her that way?" While others exchanged glances of support, recognizing that Lydia had every right to be where she was. In the midst of the swirling commotion, Lydia recalled the boarding process at Atlanta's airport. She had noted subtle tensions among the crew, but nothing could have prepared her for the abrupt and unprovoked assault by Fiona. Now, seated in the calm of first class, Lydia's inner strength began to shine. Determined not to let the incident define her, she focused on her breathing and resolved to remain composed, even as the stares and whispers continued to circulate. As the cabin gradually attempted to return to its pre-incident routine, a small group of passengers near Lydia began discussing the unfolding drama. "I just can't believe what I saw," one passenger confided, his voice trembling with disbelief. "She handled it with such grace," another added, nodding in agreement. Their quiet support created an undercurrent of empathy that contrasted sharply with the aggression displayed earlier. Despite the physical pain and the emotional shock, Lydia's resolve only deepened. She knew that her dignity, and that of every passenger who might one day face similar prejudice, depended on her ability to remain strong. Each supportive glance and every whispered word of encouragement fortified her determination. In that crowded space, Lydia's calm under pressure was transforming from a personal struggle into a subtle act of defiance against injustice. Meanwhile, the flight crew scrambled to maintain order. Some crew members exchanged worried looks as they observed the incident's impact on passengers. Their normally efficient routine was disrupted by the confrontation, and many found themselves questioning whether the enforcement of strict protocols had crossed the line into personal bias. In hushed tones, a couple of attendants speculated that perhaps the situation had been mishandled, but they were too cautious to voice their doubts openly. Throughout the flight, Lydia's experience became a silent rallying cry. Her poise in the face of unwarranted aggression encouraged those around her to reflect on the importance of respect and fairness. Even as some passengers continued to record the incident, many did so with the hope that the evidence would eventually serve as a shield against injustice. Lydia's example underscored a timeless lesson, that true strength is not measured by outward displays of emotion, but by the inner fortitude to stand up for one's rights even when the odds seem insurmountable. By the time the flight neared its destination, the initial shock had slowly given way to a collective awareness that something important was at stake. In that brief period of heightened emotion and solidarity, Lydia Carter had emerged not as a victim, but as a quiet symbol of resilience. And though the memory of the confrontation would linger long after the plane touched down in Los Angeles, her steadfast determination would serve as an enduring reminder that dignity and respect are rights that no one can take away. Just as the uneasy murmurs began to settle in the first-class cabin, a startling announcement reverberated through the aircraft. At precisely 2:59 into the flight, Derek Ellison, the charismatic CEO of Celestial Air, took to the intercom with an unexpected revelation. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to clarify that the passenger in seat 4A, Ms. Carter, is my wife," he declared, his voice smooth yet commanding. The announcement sent shockwaves through the cabin. For a brief moment, all eyes turned toward Lydia Carter. In that instant, the dynamic shifted dramatically. The fact that Lydia was not only a first-class traveler but also the wife of Celestial Air's CEO turned the confrontation on its head. As Derek's words echoed in the quiet space, Fiona Doyle's previously unassailable authority faltered visibly. Her confident posture wavered as she processed the news, and her eyes flickered with uncertainty. In the immediate aftermath, whispers spread rapidly among the passengers. Some seemed incredulous, while others exchanged knowing glances that suggested they felt vindicated by the CEO's public endorsement of Lydia's rightful place in first class. Lydia herself sat in stunned silence for a moment. Though still reeling from the earlier assault, a newfound strength began to radiate from her. She recognized that Derek's revelation was not only a personal vindication but also a powerful statement against the baseless actions of Fiona. The cabin atmosphere grew charged with a mix of relief and anticipation. Passengers who had recorded the incident now turned their devices toward the speaker as if to capture every word of the unfolding drama. Even Fiona's colleagues appeared taken aback, exchanging uncertain looks. In that fleeting moment, the balance of power had shifted significantly. Lydia Carter was no longer just any passenger, she was the wife of the company's leader. For Derek Ellison, the announcement was as much a strategic maneuver as it was a personal declaration. By publicly identifying Lydia as his wife, he not only validated her presence but also implicitly criticized the manner in which Fiona had treated her. The CEO's calm, measured tone contrasted sharply with Fiona's earlier aggressive behavior, suggesting that the higher echelons of the company did not condone such treatment. Lydia felt an internal surge of courage as she processed Derek's words. The humiliation of being slapped had given way to a sense of empowerment. Now, bolstered by the public acknowledgement of her status, she resolved to confront the injustice head-on. Every eye in the cabin seemed to focus on her, and while a few expressions of disbelief lingered, most conveyed support. A few passengers began discussing the revelation among themselves. "I always thought there was something special about her," one man remarked, his tone respectful. "Now it's clear she belongs here, and no one has the right to treat her like an outsider," said a woman seated near the window. The atmosphere transformed into a quiet affirmation of respect and dignity. Meanwhile, Fiona Doyle struggled to recover her earlier confidence. The CEO's announcement undermined her narrative entirely. Her rigid posture softened, and her eyes darted nervously around the cabin as if seeking an ally who would still back her claims. The power dynamic had irrevocably changed, leaving Fiona on uncertain footing. Passengers who had previously watched her with curiosity now scrutinized her every movement, their skepticism palpable. As the flight continued, the implications of Derek's declaration rippled through every conversation in first class. The recorded videos of the initial altercation took on a new significance in this context. They were no longer just evidence of a random act of aggression, they now testified to a broader injustice, one that even the highest authority in the company could not ignore. Lydia, drawing on this moment of transformation, felt a resolve that transcended the physical pain she had suffered. She began to speak quietly with a few supportive passengers, explaining that while the incident was traumatic, it had also ignited a determination to stand against all forms of disrespect and bias. Her words were measured and heartfelt, conveying that her personal dignity, and that of every individual facing unwarranted mistreatment, was worth fighting for. In that charged environment, Derek Ellison's announcement had not only restored Lydia's honor but had also united the first-class passengers in a silent yet powerful display of solidarity. It was a turning point, a moment when personal pain transformed into collective strength. The revelation resonated deeply with everyone on board, offering a glimmer of hope that even in the midst of confrontation, truth and integrity could prevail. Following the CEO's unexpected revelation, the confrontation in the premium cabin escalated into a full-blown struggle over dignity and authority. Fiona Doyle, now reeling from the disclosure that Lydia Carter was the wife of Derek Ellison, attempted to reassert her control by resorting to cutting sarcasm. In a tone meant to belittle, she sneered, "Well, if she's your wife, perhaps she should behave accordingly." Her words, laced with contempt, were designed to undermine Lydia's newfound vindication. However, the reaction was not as Fiona had hoped. Passengers, having absorbed the truth of Lydia's rightful claim, began to murmur their support. The recorded evidence and the CEO's intercom announcement had shifted the atmosphere in the cabin. Instead of being a minor incident of miscommunication, the altercation was now seen as a blatant abuse of power. Lydia, though still reeling from the earlier assault, found herself drawing strength from this public vindication. She maintained a calm demeanor, her eyes steady, as if daring Fiona to try and shake her resolve. Fiona's confidence started to waver. In her previous attempts to intimidate Lydia, she had relied on the assumption that her aggressive tone and strict adherence to protocol would silence any opposition. But now, with Lydia's status officially confirmed, Fiona felt her grip on the narrative slipping. She tried to counter by delivering a series of sarcastic remarks, aimed not only at Lydia but also at the passengers who now looked on with increasing skepticism. "Perhaps you'd better leave your seat if you can't handle the expectations," she quipped bitterly, her voice echoing in the now attentive cabin. Around the same time, a few passengers began to speak up. A middle-aged gentleman in a tailored suit quietly declared, "I have a confirmed reservation for the first-class experience, and every passenger deserves respect." His words, though soft, were picked up by others, and soon a chorus of murmurs of solidarity for Lydia filled the cabin. This collective shift in sentiment left Fiona visibly unsettled. Her once unchallenged authority was now under severe scrutiny, and her previous aggressive posturing was rapidly losing its effect. As the flight continued, the tension became almost tangible. Lydia's composure and dignified silence stood as a stark contrast to Fiona's increasingly erratic behavior. The atmosphere was charged with the realization that this was more than just a personal dispute, it was a battle against prejudice and an assertion of one's right to be treated with fairness and decency. Every whispered conversation and every shared look from fellow passengers reinforced Lydia's quiet defiance. In a bold move to salvage her position, Fiona attempted to divert the conversation by texting her union representative, Ted, to argue against any disciplinary action. "I'm only doing my job," she insisted through terse messages. Yet as the evidence continued to mount on social media and among the passengers, her words fell on deaf ears. The cabin's collective opinion was shifting decisively in favor of Lydia, and Fiona's attempt to rally support from above only deepened the fissures in her authority. Marcus Allen, a fellow passenger and close ally of Lydia, watched the unfolding events with growing concern. He recognized that Fiona's tactics were nothing more than a desperate bid to maintain control. Taking out his smartphone once more, Marcus began recording additional interactions, ensuring that every abusive remark was documented. "This isn't acceptable," he stated to those around him. "No one should have to endure this kind of treatment, especially not on a flight where every passenger deserves to feel safe." His words resonated with a group of passengers who had already voiced their support for Lydia earlier. In the ensuing minutes, the cabin was transformed from a scene of isolated confrontation into a microcosm of societal justice. Passengers who had earlier been passive now openly expressed their disapproval of Fiona's behavior. A young professional remarked, "It's time that we all stand up for what's right. We can't let discriminatory attitudes go unchallenged." His sentiment was echoed by others, and the once dominant narrative of control and prejudice was rapidly disintegrating. Fiona, realizing that her tactics were failing, attempted one final act of defiance. "If you cannot leave your seat, then I will be forced to call security," she announced in a voice that trembled between anger and desperation. The threat hung heavily in the air, but the collective resolve in the cabin was unmistakable. Passengers exchanged determined glances, and a few even voiced their support for Lydia in low, resolute tones. At that moment, Lydia's quiet strength became the beacon that united the cabin. Though she had suffered a physical blow and endured humiliating insults, she stood firm. "I have every right to be here," she said clearly, her voice echoing with the certainty of her convictions. "I will not be intimidated by baseless accusations or by those who seek to undermine my dignity." Her words, simple yet powerful, cut through the tension like a clarion call for justice. As the flight continued toward its destination, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin had irrevocably changed. Fiona Doyle's aggressive campaign had not only failed to dislodge Lydia but had instead united the passengers in a common cause, demanding respect, fairness, and accountability. In that confined space, a larger battle against prejudice was being waged, and Lydia Carter emerged as an emblem of resilience and dignity. After Derek Ellison's shocking announcement that Lydia Carter was his wife, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin shifted dramatically. The revelation had vindicated Lydia's presence, but it also set off a chain reaction. Fiona Doyle, the flight attendant whose earlier aggressive actions had targeted Lydia, now found her authority undermined. Determined to salvage her professional record and maintain her control, Fiona quickly retreated into her phone. In a dim corner behind the service cart, she composed a terse text message to her union representative, Ted. Fiona's fingers trembled slightly as she typed, "I'm being unfairly targeted. I followed protocol and must not be suspended. Please advise on immediate action to contest any termination." Her message was short but heavy with urgency. For Fiona, this was not simply about her personal pride, it was a desperate bid to save her career. Even as the text sent her into the void, she glanced around the cabin. Her eyes, once so confident, now darted nervously among passengers and colleagues who had begun to exchange wary glances. Meanwhile, the incident was unfolding in real time on social media. Several passengers had recorded the entire confrontation, both the earlier altercation and Fiona's latest attempt at control, and were rapidly sharing the videos online. Within minutes, Hashtags celebrating Lydia's dignity and condemning discriminatory practices began trending. On Celestial Air's official Twitter feed and local news apps, the incident was already making headlines. The viral spread of these recordings amplified the pressure on the airline's management to act. Back in the cabin, Fiona's mood oscillated between defiance and desperation. Her text to Ted was just the beginning of a larger smear campaign she hoped to launch. She believed that by painting Lydia as a troublemaker, by twisting the narrative to suggest that Lydia's calm was an act of defiance rather than dignity, she could shift the blame away from herself. In hushed tones, Fiona muttered to herself, "I was just enforcing the rules, they have to understand that I'm only doing my job." But as the videos circulated and the public's support for Lydia grew, Fiona's arguments fell flat. Lydia, who had been quietly enduring the ordeal with unwavering poise, began to notice the subtle changes in the cabin's atmosphere. While earlier there were sympathetic glances and murmurs of support, now she observed a growing undercurrent of outrage. Passengers who had previously remained neutral were now actively sharing their opinions on social media, their faces lit by the glow of their phones. One well-dressed passenger leaned over to his companion and whispered, "Have you seen these clips? This isn't just about a mistake, it's systemic bias on display." Meanwhile, Ted, the union representative, quickly responded to Fiona's message. Within minutes, a reply arrived, "I understand your concerns, Fiona. I will call you shortly. In the meantime, document everything and stand by your account." Fiona felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Although she now had union support, she knew that the evidence streaming online was painting a different picture, a picture that could cost her not only her job but also her credibility. In the cramped space behind her service counter, Fiona's fellow attendants exchanged worried looks. Some remembered the professionalism they were taught to uphold, while others recognized that Fiona's behavior had been overly harsh. The tension among the crew was palpable, and it wasn't long before whispers spread that the incident was being taken very seriously by senior management. As the flight continued, the air in first class vibrated with energy. Every time a new video clip surfaced on social media, the murmurs grew louder. Passengers discussed the details in quiet groups, how Fiona had aggressively singled out Lydia, how her tone had shifted from authoritative to downright abusive, and how a woman with a confirmed reservation was being unjustly humiliated in front of everyone. These discussions were not hostile toward Lydia, rather, they served as a collective outcry for accountability. Lydia herself listened silently to the unfolding drama, her heart heavy with both sorrow and resolve. She knew that this incident could have easily broken her spirit, yet she clung to the quiet strength that had defined her throughout the flight. Each supportive comment from fellow passengers and each new post on social media reaffirmed that she was not alone, that justice, though delayed, was on its way. By the time the flight neared its next phase, Fiona's text and union communication had sparked internal reviews within Celestial Air. Passengers could sense that something was changing. The viral footage was not only exposing Fiona's misconduct but also compelling the airline's leadership to re-examine its protocols. In that charged atmosphere, the balance of power had begun to shift. The once dominant narrative of blame was now increasingly in Lydia's favor, even as Fiona scrambled to cling to her position. In the final minutes before the next announcement over the intercom, a palpable silence fell over the cabin, a silence heavy with expectation, uncertainty, and the promise of accountability. Lydia, with her infant son cradled in her arms, sat with quiet dignity as the incident's legacy was being forged in real time. It was a moment that would reverberate far beyond that flight, a moment where truth and resilience began to triumph over prejudice and abuse of power. In the aftermath of Fiona Doyle's desperate text and the ensuing viral explosion of video evidence, Lydia Carter began to sense a disturbing undercurrent emerging. While the initial revelation that she was Derek Ellison's wife had shifted the narrative in her favor, Lydia soon realized that Fiona was not finished yet. Beneath the facade of professionalism, Fiona was plotting to twist the narrative further, and the media was already being courted for a sensational story. Late in the flight, as the cabin lights dimmed again for the night service, Lydia felt a chill run down her spine. Passengers who had earlier supported her now whispered about alternative versions of events, and several could be seen scrolling through their social media feeds. Lydia's eyes, though tired, grew wary as she observed Fiona's furtive glances toward her colleagues. It was as if Fiona had already begun orchestrating her next move, one designed to cast Lydia not as a victim, but as a disruptor. Lydia recalled the earlier moments when Fiona's tone had shifted from stern authority to outright aggression. Now, as the flight entered its final leg, the situation took on a more sinister hue. Passengers began noticing that Fiona was seen texting rapidly, her face set in an expression of cold determination. Rumors began to circulate that Fiona was coordinating with external media contacts, attempting to fabricate a narrative that would undermine Lydia's integrity. Among the passengers, a quiet buzz started to rise. Several travelers exchanged worried glances as one whispered, "I heard Fiona is already talking to a reporter." Another added, "They say she plans to release a statement that turns the tables on Lydia." The disquiet among the passengers was palpable. They knew that if Fiona succeeded, the hard-won truth might be obscured by a media spin. Meanwhile, Lydia, though physically exhausted, felt a surge of protective determination. She had endured so much already, the slap, the humiliation, the wrongful detention, and she was not about to allow her reputation to be further tarnished by a calculated smear campaign. In a moment of introspection, Lydia decided that if Fiona was going to manipulate the narrative, she would do everything in her power to counter it. Quietly, she reached for her phone and began recording her own account of the unfolding events. "This is my truth," she murmured to herself, determined to document every detail for the sake of transparency. In hushed conversations that followed, several passengers expressed their growing concern. "Fiona is trying to twist this story," one traveler confided to another. "We can't let the media paint a false picture," another added. Their voices were low, but the conviction in them was unmistakable. The sense of community among those who had witnessed the injustice was growing stronger, and they vowed, silently or aloud, to support Lydia if Fiona's narrative turned against her. Across the cabin, a few flight attendants exchanged worried glances. They had been instructed to maintain decorum, but now even they appeared unsettled by the prospect of an orchestrated media assault. One attendant, speaking softly to a colleague, remarked, "This isn't just about enforcing protocol anymore. It's become a fight over our very reputation." Their unease underscored the fact that Fiona's actions were not isolated, she was mobilizing her resources to shape public opinion. As the flight continued, the digital buzz from social media grew louder. Passengers started posting their own versions of the incident, many sharing snippets of the earlier video footage that clearly showed Lydia's composed reaction and Fiona's aggressive behavior. Hashtags promoting solidarity with Lydia began trending among the first-class community, and the story was quickly spreading beyond the confines of the plane. Lydia's determination was bolstered by these developments. Though she was still reeling from the physical pain and emotional turmoil of the earlier confrontation, she found strength in knowing that the truth was her ally. She knew that Fiona's attempt to turn the narrative using the media was a tactic born of desperation, a tactic that could be countered by persistent documentation and the collective voice of supportive witnesses. In a quiet moment near the cabin's rear, Lydia confided in a sympathetic passenger. "I fear that Fiona is planning something even worse," she said softly, her eyes reflecting both resolve and vulnerability. "She's already texting reporters and trying to twist what happened. But I have every intention of making sure that the real story comes out." The passenger nodded, affirming that truth would prevail if they all remained vigilant. As the hours ticked by, the atmosphere in the cabin grew thick with anticipation. Every time a new message flashed on a screen or a passenger's voice rose in conversation, Lydia felt the stakes rising. The flight was no longer just a means of travel, it had become a battleground for truth, where every recorded moment and every shared message was a step toward preserving her dignity. In that charged environment, Lydia vowed to keep her resolve unbroken. She continued to record her account, capturing the ambient sounds and snippets of conversations that corroborated her version of events. Her quiet determination was matched by the support of many who had taken to social media to share their own evidence and reflections. Together, they were forming a digital archive, a modern-day ledger of truth that would, in time, hold those responsible for injustice accountable. By the time the aircraft began its final descent, the narrative had clearly shifted. Though Fiona's attempts to manipulate the media narrative were still in progress, the collective evidence and the solidarity of the passengers had created an undeniable counterweight. Lydia Carter's voice, supported by countless witnesses and digital records, would soon ensure that the truth was not only heard but also celebrated. As the plane touched down at the bustling Los Angeles airport, the conflict that had unfolded high above finally spilled into the real world. When Lydia Carter stepped off the aircraft, her infant son cradled close, she was met not with the calm passage of travelers but with a hostile crowd. The airport terminal, usually a place of routine transitions, had transformed into a battleground of public opinion. Earlier in the flight, Fiona Doyle's smear campaign had not only ruffled the feathers of fellow passengers, it had ignited a fire among a vocal group of her supporters. As Lydia made her way through the terminal, a throng of individuals began to close in around her. Their voices, raised in anger and disdain, echoed off the polished walls. "She doesn't belong here," shouted one man, while another woman hissed, "Get out of first class." The chorus of insults and accusations filled the air, creating a palpable sense of hostility. Lydia's heart pounded as she tried to navigate through the crowd. Despite her exhaustion and the lingering pain from the flight, she maintained her dignified composure. Clutching her son tightly, she attempted to push through the mass of voices that were determined to shame her. Every insult felt like a blow, yet she refused to let them see her falter. "I have every right to be here," she thought, drawing on the reservoir of strength that had carried her through the ordeal on the plane. In the midst of the chaos, a small group of passengers who had supported Lydia during the flight rallied around her. They formed a protective circle, shielding her from the onslaught of hateful comments. Among them was Evan Price, the lawyer who had recorded the earlier incident. His presence lent credibility to Lydia's account. "Don't listen to them," he said firmly, his voice steady amid the clamor. "You are innocent, and we know the truth." His words, though calm, cut through the hostile noise like a beacon of clarity. Despite this small measure of solidarity, the crowd's anger continued to swell. Several of Fiona Doyle's supporters, emboldened by their belief in her version of events, hurled insults at Lydia. They accused her of deceit and dishonesty, claiming that her calm demeanor was a ruse to manipulate the situation. The verbal barrage was relentless, and at one point, a particularly aggressive individual seized Lydia's arm as she tried to move toward a quieter exit. The physical contact escalated the confrontation dramatically, and panic rippled through the gathered crowd. Security personnel, already on alert from the earlier in-flight disturbance, rushed toward the scene. However, in the confusion that ensued, the lines between order and chaos blurred. Some passengers shouted that Lydia was the aggressor, while others maintained that she was simply defending her honor. The situation quickly spiraled into a heated melee, with guards attempting to restore order amid the clamor of shouts and accusations. In the ensuing struggle, Lydia was forcefully separated from the crowd. Despite her protests and pleas to be left alone, security officers, swayed by the conflicting accounts, detained her. In the chaos, a flurry of mobile phones recorded every moment, capturing the looks of shock on the faces of bystanders and the dismay of those who had supported Lydia. Evan Price's earlier recordings had gone viral, and now they were being replayed on news screens in the terminal. The public, already abuzz with debate, watched in disbelief as the scene unfolded. Amid the turmoil, Lydia's husband arrived at the terminal, his face etched with concern. He reached out, trying to pull her away from the throng, but security continued to hold her back. "This is not how it should be," he insisted, his voice breaking with both anger and desperation. Yet the officers, caught between multiple narratives, acted swiftly and without empathy, leading to Lydia's arrest for what they termed disorderly conduct. As Lydia was escorted toward a waiting police van, her eyes met those of many sympathetic passengers. Their expressions conveyed sorrow and solidarity, a silent promise that the truth would not be buried by this injustice. In that harrowing moment, Lydia's arrest was not just a personal tragedy. It became a symbol of the larger struggle against prejudice and the abuse of authority. Later that day, news of Lydia Carter's arrest spread rapidly. Social media exploded with outrage, and local news stations picked up the story. Protesters gathered outside the airport, demanding her release and calling for accountability within Celestial Air. Evan Price's recordings and eyewitness testimonies lent weight to the public outcry, making it clear that Lydia's detainment was a gross miscarriage of justice. Even as Lydia sat in a holding cell, her resolve remained unbroken. In a quiet, defiant video recorded on her phone, she stated, "I will not be silenced. I stand for every person who has ever been marginalized by injustice." That message, broadcast live, galvanized a community of supporters who vowed to fight until every wrong was righted. In the final hours of the day, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the protests roared outside, Lydia's arrest became a rallying cry. It was a testament to the power of truth and the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that even when faced with overwhelming hostility, one's dignity and self-worth cannot be taken away. And though the battle was far from over, Lydia Carter's unwavering stand promised that justice, however delayed, was inevitable. If you found this story inspiring, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell to support our channel. Your engagement helps us continue sharing powerful narratives that champion justice, dignity, and the strength of the human spirit. In the midst of the turbulent journey, as the plane soared above the clouds, events took an even darker turn. Shortly after the dramatic in-flight confrontation, Lydia Carter, who had endured Fiona Doyle's harsh accusations with grace, found herself suddenly and unjustly locked up. At approximately 38:04 into the flight, the situation escalated when security personnel, acting on a distorted version of events, apprehended Lydia. Despite her calm protests and the silent dignity with which she cradled her infant son, the officers, swayed by Fiona's earlier hostile report, removed her from the cabin for further questioning. The detainment sent shockwaves through the premium cabin of Celestial Air. Passengers who had witnessed every moment of the confrontation began to record what they saw, and within minutes, Derek Ellison, the CEO of Celestial Air, had learned of the unfolding injustice. With a measured tone over the intercom, Derek announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, please note that Ms. Carter is my wife," a revelation that rippled through the cabin and forced a re-evaluation of the entire incident. Yet even as Derek's words validated Lydia's rightful claim to her seat, the security officers remained unmoved, and Lydia was escorted into a confined area where she was held apart from the other passengers. Outside the immediate chaos, murmurs of outrage and disbelief quickly spread. Many passengers began sharing their recordings on social media, and hashtags supporting Lydia's dignity and condemning discriminatory practices began trending. For those on board, the sight of Lydia's resolute face, even behind the partition, became a symbol of injustice. She sat with her head held high, her eyes determined despite the humiliation of being removed from the cabin. Derek Ellison wasted no time. He convened a small meeting with senior crew members and local security, demanding an immediate review of the incident. "This is not how we treat our passengers, especially not someone who has every right to be here," he stated firmly. His voice, both authoritative and compassionate, reverberated throughout the cabin and across the gathered media. The video evidence provided by multiple passengers left little doubt. Lydia had conducted herself with unyielding grace under fire, while Fiona's aggressive behavior had escalated the conflict unjustly. Within hours, the viral recordings had ignited a firestorm of public outrage. Social media exploded with posts decrying the wrongful detainment and racial bias that had played out on a Celestial Air flight. Prominent civil rights activists, local news stations, and even some industry insiders called for immediate accountability. The evidence that Derek had secured, combined with eyewitness testimonies, painted a picture of a system that allowed prejudice to thrive under the guise of protocol. For Lydia, being locked up was a searing injustice, yet it also galvanized her inner strength. In the confines of her holding area, she recorded a brief, determined message on her smartphone: "I will not be silenced. I stand for truth and dignity, and I will fight until justice prevails." Her words, though whispered, resonated powerfully among those who later shared the video online. They became a rallying cry, a declaration that even in the face of systemic bias, the human spirit could endure and triumph. As the hours passed, the pressure mounted on Celestial Air's management to address the situation. Internal meetings were convened, and an independent review board was promised to investigate the incident thoroughly. Derek Ellison, visibly disturbed by what had transpired, vowed publicly that no form of discrimination would be tolerated under his watch. His commitment to transparency and accountability shone through as he promised that all available evidence would be scrutinized, and that the responsible parties would be held accountable. Meanwhile, passengers in the cabin continued to record and discuss the incident, their collective voice a testament to the power of unity in the face of injustice. Every shared video and every retweeted message chipped away at the narrative that Fiona Doyle had tried to craft. The truth, supported by digital evidence and personal testimonies, was beginning to force its way into public consciousness. In that charged atmosphere, Lydia Carter's wrongful detainment became more than an isolated incident, it evolved into a symbol of resistance against prejudice and abuse of authority. As the flight continued its long journey toward its destination, Lydia's resilience was celebrated by those who recognized that true dignity comes not from conforming to discriminatory expectations, but from standing firmly by one's rightful claim. The seeds of change had been sown, and in that small, divided cabin, the fight for justice had taken on a life of its own. As the aircraft began its final descent into New York, the once confined incident in Celestial Air's first class had burst into a full-fledged outcry for justice. Passengers, who had earlier recorded every moment of the confrontation, were now united in their determination to see that Lydia Carter's innocence be upheld. The viral videos and real-time social media updates had transformed the narrative. No longer was Lydia's detainment seen as an isolated mistake, it was a glaring example of systemic prejudice. In the buzzing terminal, the atmosphere was charged with a mix of outrage and solidarity. Passengers who had been on board discussed the incident in hushed yet impassioned tones. A middle-aged man in an elegant suit leaned over to his companion and said, "I've seen the footage, this is clearly a case of abuse of power. Lydia deserves better." His words, carried on through the crowd, affirmed that many were now questioning the legitimacy of the actions taken by Celestial Air's security team. Derek Ellison's earlier declaration over the intercom had sent shockwaves among those on board, but it also reached a wider audience through the rapid spread of Evan Price's recordings and other eyewitness accounts. Local news outlets were already covering the story, and online forums buzzed with commentary condemning the wrongful detainment and the racial profiling that had occurred. For many, Lydia's plight had become a rallying point, a symbol of the fight against discrimination in spaces that were supposed to be safe and dignified. Inside the terminal, a small group of supportive passengers gathered near the exit, each sharing their personal accounts of the incident. One young professional declared, "I witnessed the whole ordeal. Lydia was treated with nothing but disdain, and it's high time that we hold those responsible accountable." Another passenger, a well-dressed elderly woman, added, "No one should be targeted for who they are. Today, we stand with Lydia." As these voices grew louder, Celestial Air's management was forced to confront the undeniable evidence. In a hastily arranged press conference, a senior executive acknowledged that the actions taken on board were under investigation. "We take every complaint seriously," the executive said, though his tone betrayed uncertainty. The public reaction, however, was swift and unforgiving. Hashtags like #StandWithLydia and #JusticeForLydia began trending, and calls for reform within the airline escalated rapidly. In the courtroom that followed, Lydia's case became emblematic of a larger struggle. The trial was packed with supporters who had followed the story from its inception. Witnesses, including passengers and crew members, testified about what they had seen that fateful flight. Every piece of video evidence that had circulated on social media was presented, leaving little room for doubt. The evidence painted a damning picture of how a single act of prejudice could snowball into a systemically unjust response. During the proceedings, Lydia's legal team, led by Derek Ellison, argued passionately that her detainment was not only unwarranted but a violation of her civil rights. Their case was bolstered by the collective testimony of those who had recorded or witnessed the incident. The courtroom buzzed with the energy of a community that had been wronged, united by a shared belief in justice and fairness. As the trial continued, the focus shifted from the isolated event to the broader implications of such discriminatory practices in air travel. Experts were called to testify about systemic bias in service industries, and the debate grew heated. The trial, once thought to be a minor skirmish over a disputed seat, had evolved into a landmark case for civil rights within the airline industry. Throughout the legal battle, Lydia maintained a quiet dignity that captured the hearts of those following the case. Despite the emotional and physical toll of being wrongfully detained, she remained steadfast, her voice a symbol of resilience in the face of systemic injustice. Her unwavering composure, contrasted sharply with the aggressive tactics employed by Fiona Doyle, underscored the truth of her innocence. By the time the courtroom sessions drew to a close, it was clear that the collective evidence and heartfelt testimonies had swayed public opinion and, ultimately, the verdict. The trial was not only a personal vindication for Lydia but a wake-up call to an industry that had long tolerated unchecked bias. The ripple effects of the trial were felt far beyond the courthouse, as civil rights organizations and consumer advocates demanded sweeping changes to prevent similar injustices in the future. In that charged moment, as Lydia prepared to step out of the courtroom into a world waiting for change, the message was clear: standing up for one's dignity, even in the face of overwhelming odds, can ignite a movement for justice. And the power of truth, when shared by many, can transform injustice into a catalyst for lasting reform. With the trial concluded and the verdict delivered, the story of Lydia Carter took on new dimensions as it spilled into the public sphere. The moment the courtroom doors swung open, Lydia was greeted by a wave of supporters and reporters alike. The verdict had not only cleared her name but had exposed a system riddled with discriminatory practices, a system that would no longer be allowed to hide behind empty protocols. At Coral Bay International Airport, where the verdict was making headlines, Lydia's supporters gathered outside. They carried banners calling for equality and justice in air travel. Passers-by stopped to listen as community leaders and activists spoke passionately about the importance of holding institutions accountable. In interviews with local news channels, several passengers recounted how they had witnessed the injustice on board and how the viral video evidence had transformed their perceptions. "It's not just about one woman," one activist declared, "it's about every person who has ever been marginalized by prejudice." Meanwhile, Celestial Air's management found themselves under intense scrutiny. In a hastily arranged press conference, a senior executive apologized for the incident, promising immediate reforms. "We are launching an independent review of our procedures and will implement comprehensive training to prevent such occurrences in the future," the executive announced, his tone measured yet strained. However, the damage had been done. The public outcry and the widespread support for Lydia had made it clear that superficial apologies would not suffice. Derek Ellison, who had initially validated Lydia's presence on board by announcing her as his wife, now took an even more active role. Working closely with civil rights organizations, he vowed to overhaul Celestial Air's internal policies. "This incident has exposed deep flaws in our system," he stated in a follow-up interview. "We will not tolerate discrimination in any form. Our commitment is to ensure that every passenger, regardless of their background, is treated with the utmost respect and dignity." His words resonated with a broad audience, and soon the hashtag Celestial Change began trending online. As Lydia made her way through the terminal, her husband at her side offering silent support, she was met by reporters eager to capture her reaction. With quiet resolve, Lydia spoke about the importance of standing up against injustice. "I hope my story inspires others to never allow themselves to be diminished by prejudice," she said, her voice steady despite the evident strain. "We must hold those in power accountable, and we must never be afraid to assert our rights." Her remarks, simple and heartfelt, struck a chord with people across the country. The legal victory was not just a personal triumph for Lydia, it was a catalyst for broader change. Advocacy groups pressed for tighter regulations and more transparent review processes within the airline industry. New policies were drafted to ensure that any act of discrimination would be met with swift, decisive action. The trial had not only exposed the egregious behavior of individuals like Fiona Doyle but also forced an entire institution to confront its systemic biases. In the following weeks, news outlets provided in-depth coverage of the case. Analysts discussed how the verdict could reshape industry practices, while social media platforms buzzed with discussions about civil rights and corporate accountability. Lydia's story had become a beacon of hope for many who had long felt voiceless in the face of injustice. Standing outside Coral Bay International, with the bright Los Angeles sky overhead, Lydia reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Despite the pain, the public humiliation, and the days spent fighting in court, she felt a profound sense of liberation. The ordeal had stripped away the veneer of indifference and revealed the power of unity and truth. With her son safely in her arms and her husband by her side, Lydia knew that while the battle was hard fought, the victory was real. As the crowds dispersed and the terminal buzzed with renewed energy, Lydia's case stood as a testament to the idea that no matter how corrupt a system may seem, persistent truth and collective courage can pave the way for lasting change. The story of Lydia Carter would serve as a rallying cry for fairness in air travel and beyond, a reminder that when we speak up against injustice, every voice matters. If you found this story inspiring, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell to support our channel. Your engagement helps us continue sharing powerful narratives that champion justice, equality, and the strength of the human spirit. In the final moments of the long and tumultuous journey, the tide of justice began to turn decisively. As Celestial Air's flight from Atlanta to Los Angeles neared its end, the chaotic events that had unfolded high above the clouds reached their dramatic conclusion. Following hours of relentless public scrutiny, digital recordings, and impassioned testimonies, Fiona Doyle's relentless smear campaign finally unraveled. With mounting evidence against her, Celestial Air's management had no choice but to take swift action. At the bustling arrival terminal, the atmosphere was electric. News of the viral incident had spread rapidly, and a crowd of outraged passengers and media representatives had gathered near the exit. Derek Ellison, the resolute CEO of Celestial Air, had been a tireless advocate for Lydia Carter, and now his commitment was evident to all. Standing tall beside his wife, Lydia, and holding their infant son close, Derek's presence was both a reassurance and a declaration: injustice would not be tolerated. Security personnel, acting on the overwhelming evidence that had been documented by Evan Price and countless eyewitnesses, escorted Fiona Doyle away from the terminal. Her face, once brimming with unfounded authority, was now etched with disbelief and resignation. As she was led into a waiting police vehicle, murmurs of approval and solidarity echoed among the crowd. For many, Fiona's arrest was not just the fall of an individual, it was the fall of a system that had allowed prejudice to fester unchecked. Amid the clamor, Lydia Carter stood in the center of the terminal, a symbol of resilience and grace. Despite the physical and emotional scars of the ordeal, she exuded a quiet strength that resonated with everyone present. Her gaze, steady and unyielding, met those of fellow travelers who offered silent nods of respect. In that moment, Lydia understood that her struggle had transcended her own experience, it had become a beacon for all who had been marginalized by systemic bias. Local news cameras captured every detail as Lydia's story unfolded. Reporters peppered her with questions, but she answered with measured calm. "Today, I stand not only for myself but for every person who has ever been judged unfairly," she said softly, her voice imbued with quiet determination. We deserve dignity, respect, and the right to be who we are, without fear of discrimination. Her words, broadcast live across social media, rippled outward, sparking widespread conversations about equality and the need for systemic reform in the airline industry. In the midst of the media frenzy, community leaders and civil rights advocates gathered, lauding Lydia's unwavering stand. A local activist declared, "Lydia's courage is a turning point, a reminder that when we unite against injustice, even the most deeply entrenched prejudices can be overcome." The resounding support from across the nation signaled that change was not only possible but inevitable. Inside Celestial Air's headquarters, the fallout was equally dramatic. Senior executives, now facing mounting pressure from regulators and the public, initiated an independent review of all internal policies. Derek Ellison vowed that new diversity training programs and strict accountability measures would be implemented to prevent such incidents from ever recurring. "This is our moment to rebuild trust," he stated firmly. "No one, regardless of their position, is above the law." As the day drew to a close, Lydia's personal life began to take on a new light. Reunited with her husband, who had been by her side throughout the ordeal, and with their infant son nestled in her arms, she felt an overwhelming sense of liberation. The hardships of the flight, the unexpected slap, the subsequent smear campaign, the wrongful detention, had all become a crucible in which her inner strength was forged. What had once been a painful episode had transformed into a catalyst for personal and systemic change. Walking out into the crisp evening air of Los Angeles, Lydia looked around at the faces of those who had gathered to support her, and she realized that her story had become a rallying cry for justice. It was a powerful reminder that even when institutions fail and voices are silenced, the courage to stand up for one's dignity can ignite a movement that reverberates far beyond a single incident. Lydia Carter's journey, marked by hardship and resistance, ultimately paved the way for a new beginning. With her husband and son by her side, she stepped forward into a future where truth and integrity reigned. Her resilience had not only reclaimed her honor but had also set in motion a wave of accountability that promised lasting change in the world of air travel, and beyond. If you found this story inspiring, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell to support our channel. Your engagement helps us continue sharing powerful narratives that champion justice, dignity, and the strength of the human spirit.